What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Sloppy Saturdays. And today we are going over one of the biggest rumors in college football over the last day or two. We are talking about the possibility of Nick Saban returning to coaching. Now, everybody knows when Nick Saban was in college football, he was the face of college football. He is the GOAT college football coach for sure. To some people, the GOAT of football, period. But today we're going to go over the rumor that we heard, the quote that Nick Saban could possibly be returned to college football, and I'm just going to give my total thoughts on it. So the quote comes from Greg McElroy and his source. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that Greg McElroy and his source are definitely credible. We know how close Greg McElroy is to Nick Saban, so there is no doubt that there is a thought in Nick Saban's mind of coming back to coaching. We're going to go over the quote and then talk about if I think this is actually going to happen. Now, the quote reads, "This is a little bit out of left field, but the question was asked of me, a very much in the know person I have a lot of respect for, have spent a lot of time around, and just really, really admire. They seem to think Nick Saban's not done coaching. I had a similar reaction, which was a crazy reaction. He's pretty adamant that he thinks Nick Saban will return to coaching again. Look, if it wasn't somebody notable, I would never say a word." Wow. So Greg McElroy and his source, like I said, that I believe are pretty credible, think there is a thought in Nick Saban's mind coming back to coaching. Now, the one thing I do have to say, there is 100% thoughts in Nick Saban's mind coming back to coaching. That's without a doubt. When you've been coaching for 50 years, when you've been doing anything for 50 plus years, there's always going to be a thought in coming back to it. And until you actually retire and go through the retirement process, 4 months, for a year, there you don't know what is actually going to be like until you do it. Yes, you can have the thought of it, but you don't know what it is actually like until you do it. Now, do I think Nick Saban is going to return to coaching? I'm going to say it flat out. I think it is a thought in his head, obviously. I do not think he's returning back to coaching. I just don't think it would make sense. Now, the first reason is you're not going to get a better situation than Alabama. First off, Nick Saban is looked at as God in Alabama. There is nobody that looked at a higher light in that state than him. When he goes back, again, the love that he receives, it is just unconditional love. Do I think that Nick Saban is going to jump ship, to a rival SEC school? Not really jump ship, but is he going to go to another SEC school? It just doesn't make sense to me. Like his light would dim a little bit if he went to, a rival in conference school and he is looked at as, like I said, God in that state. It just wouldn't make sense to me. Now, there is no better situation that Nick Saban can go to when you talk about resources, when you talk about credibility, when you talk about name power than Alabama. So this is why this doesn't really make sense to me. Unless it's like I said, like he wasn't expecting retirement to be how it is. It makes absolutely no sense for him to leave Alabama and go somewhere else. The name he built up there, how he's looked at there, and just the powerhouse of a school it is in that conference, like you're not going anywhere better. So for me, that doesn't make sense to me. For me personally, it's like, why would he leave in the first place under his own power when he's not going to go to a situation better than that? Now, again, also the biggest thing for college football as well, very different to professional sports. The amount of job openings in college football is just so different than in college sports. It's just so different from a pro sport. Like, what really premier job that Nick Saban would possibly want could open up? Like, what would his realistic options be? And he's not going to put himself, a guy in Nick Saban's stature is not going to put himself in a situation where it isn't a top situation in college football. And like the only place that I could think that could possibly open up in the near future with coaches on the hot seat, programs on the hot seat, is maybe Florida or USC. Again, two very notable schools, one in the SEC. But again, you're talking about situations that aren't at the height of Alabama. Yeah, if Nick Saban were to go coach at any school, people are going to follow him because he's Nick Saban. But again, I just don't see that being realistic. Like, even like if those teams have a good year, those teams are off the board too. Like, again, a lot would happen for like a premier school to need a coach and for them to select Nick Saban. Because then again, I think again, a lot of people would be interested in Nick Saban. Obviously, a lot of schools. This is the GOAT of college football. But again, you're talking about a guy that's 73 years old, and a lot of programs want somebody that's going to be a face of their program for an extended period of time. When you look at the NFL, how they rotate coaches in a year or two, it's very different in college football. You want somebody that's going to be with your program for a while. So at 73 years of age, too, that just does not make a lot of sense to me. And the main reason why I think Nick Saban is not going to return to college football is because I think he left because he saw, the playing field wide, and like with NIL, with the transfer portal, with this new age of college football, you are opening up the possibilities of teams to compete for a national championship that maybe necessarily weren't doing that before. When you talk about a wide variety of teams with deep pockets, it's a lot different than when Nick Saban was coaching in the height of college football. Like it was really just based on name value of a program. Teams were going to, 3, 4, 5 schools, and that was it. Like top players, like we're going to Alabama, Georgia. Like it was a very select few schools that these 5-star recruits were going to, and these schools were just winning out because they were getting every recruit they basically wanted. Now with the competition of NIL and the competition of just money and outbidding people, that opens up more schools in the mix. But not only that, the possibility of a player transferring from a year-to-year basis, that also is a thing that you have to compete with as well. Now, do I think Nick Saban could definitely adapt to this new age college football? 100%. There isn't anything that I think Nick Saban can't do in the college football world, but I think that's ultimately why he left because, again, at age 73, he didn't want to adapt to a new age of the sport. And like I said, with the gap widening, I think he decided to leave. So that's why I think he ultimately left. Now, the one thing I could see Nick Saban possibly doing if he was getting back into coaching, maybe taking an NFL job as a coordinator or something there. Like if you were to embrace a new challenge, that would make a lot of sense to me. But I can't see him leaving Alabama, going to another school that's in a worse situation than Alabama would be in. Like that doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't seem smart. And especially at the age of 73, like I can't see him taking on a whole nother program as a head coach. But very similar to Bill Belichick, like if he were to take on a new challenge, like Bill Belichick went into the college route, if he were to take a coordinator job in the NFL, if that fire still burns with him, that would make a little more sense to me. But again, I just can't see him because I feel like we all knew the reason why Nick Saban left Alabama. Like it was this new age of college football, the gap widened. He possibly didn't want to adapt to that. And leaving college football, leaving Alabama and going back to another school that's in a worse situation in Alabama a year or two later just does not make sense to me. That wraps up this episode of college football, of Sloppy Saturdays, of Nick Saban possibly coming back to coaching. Again, I think it is definitely a thought in his head. When you are doing something for 50 plus years, you always have the thought of going back to it. But I could not see him going back to college football. That's my opinion. And I hope I'm wrong, honestly, because college football is a better place with Nick Saban. That wraps up this episode of Sloppy Saturdays, and we are